Well, hello, I'm David Walker. Welcome to Australia Under the Microscope. I'm your host. This is a very special edition of Questions Without Notice. We're now more than 18 months into something that has ravished, changed, and altered all our lives, the COVID-19 situation. This is the vaccine edition. As always, we'll ask your questions to experts with inside knowledge. They're given no notice to prepare their answer. Candid discussions, inside knowledge you must know about. Join me as we welcome back former university lecturer and social commentator Simon Paton. We go now to Simon himself. Simon, hello. Where in the nation are you today?
David, I'm speaking to you from the national capital in Canberra. I'm actually on the Kingston foreshore, which is a lovely part of Canberra on Lake Burley-Griffin. So for many of our listeners in the national capital, they'll know where I'm talking about. For those around the rest of the country or indeed around the world, Kingston is one of those lovely sort of inner suburbs in the south of Canberra. Not far from Parliament House in real terms, about 3 k's away, but it's probably more fun than some of the activities that have taken place out of the Houses of Parliament. For example, Clive Palmer and Malcolm Turnbull once had a famous meal down here on the foreshore. More recently, this was a rather fatal, well, not fatal, but it was a very poignant place because Brittany Higgins, of course, was also down here on the foreshore the night prior to her very disturbing experiences in Parliament House. So, this is a really interesting part of Canberra, and it's certainly the centre of all things sort of political out of the Parliament. There's a lot of apartments around here where a lot of the staffers and some of the politicians have residences. So it's a nice place to be, although it's not the middle of the night while we're recording this, David. It's actually around midday in Canberra, and a stunning winter's day, I might say.
Absolutely. The epicentre and a place where news has been born. You mentioned Higgins, Turnbull, Palmer. Another item dominating the news, just the centre of all news, especially this week with some strategic master planning, finally, the vaccine, COVID-19. Tell me a bit about your own week.
Well, I've had a very interesting week. We last spoke. I've finally managed to get the first of the Pfizer vaccines, and what an experience that was, David. And I'll tell you why, and I think our listeners will appreciate this as well. I attempted the week before last to register to obtain a vaccine in Canberra. Now, I'm a resident of Queensland, no, but I work in Canberra, and the consequences of that mean that I'm sort of a bit of a diplomat, really. I don't have any formal credentials. I mean, I own property in Canberra, but I don't have formal credentials in terms of residency here at the moment, and therefore I don't have a ACT licence. So the application you need to sort of log into in Canberra to be recognised to use the health system doesn't permit someone like me to access the application. So the consequence of that is I couldn't get a COVID vax here. I was in Queensland last weekend, and I did stroll down, or I had attempted for a second to use the Queensland government's vaccine systems, and that was an interesting entertainment, I can tell you, David, because the reality is this last week, Premier Palaszczuk and Deputy Premier Mills have come out and really bashed up, and so has the Chief Health Officer, Jeanette Young, have bashed up on the federal government and really on a whole range of angles, and we can talk about those angles in a minute. But one thing I'd like to stress is this. I decided to go down to the Coast University Hospital in Batinia, and I'd attempted twice to apply for a booking number to use the online systems to get access. Now, one of the problems with this booking system is that you need to provide your Medicare number. Now, if you recall, your Medicare card has your number on it, and then it has your name underneath, and any members of your family happen to be on that card as well, and each of those members has a number. So you've then got to remove the number associated with yourself and place it alongside the number of your Medicare number on the application form. No guidance, incidentally, with respect to this. So, of course, when you put the Medicare number into this application, this online form, it rejects it. Now, of course, if it rejects your Medicare number, because you haven't added the individual number off the card that is your own personal recogniser, for want of a better term. The system doesn't acknowledge you, therefore you don't go any further. So, and there's no guidance that you need to do this. So twice I tried this, and I went down to the hospital. I said, look, here's my Medicare card. I can't do this in Canberra. I want to do it here today. How do we do this? And they went, oh, well, you can't do it unless you're booked. I said, I've tried twice. I said, I just want to get this jab. Can we move this on, please? And they're saying to me, oh, yes, everyone has this problem. And I said, well, maybe we need to fix the problem. Maybe a bit of guidance about the need for the ancillary number. Oh, well, that's the government's fault. And I said, yeah, which government? The state government. So you see, it's all, well, to fire broadsides out at ScoMo and all these other people about the lack of vaccines, but if your own technology can't handle the surge, and this is the day, ironically, this was before the lockdown on the Sunshine Coast, I managed to get out just before that started. But the simple reality is, if you're going to have this high-tech online system, David, how do 89-year-old women in Kingston, how do they, well, or anywhere, frankly, on Caloundra, how do those people, how do they actually understand what's required of them? Can you answer that question for me, please? So this is the reality. The simple fact of the matter is that if you're going to play that game, and this kind of, this he said, she said stuff that's going on between the state governments and the federal government at the moment really does expose the truth of it. We all have a Medicare card, David, but when I walked in with my Medicare card, it was very difficult. Now, I will say this in defence of the Sunshine Coast University Hospital. They opened all the doors for me, David. They said, you've tried, we found your problem, we're going to open doors. I got the vaccine. I got it, but I can tell you, I wasn't leaving that hospital. And I probably knew how to articulate my position pretty clearly. But I've got to say to you, if you're a 93-year-old veteran and you come down there in your wheelchair or whatever, and you couldn't communicate as clearly as I can, then what is the consequence for that person? Are they just going to be sent away? Is this the way we treat our older people? Is this the way we treat, people who perhaps don't understand English or, have various impairments that create uncertainty and fear? Do we just send them away?
Extraordinary point. Vaccine hesitancy at the best of times is a problem. If those who are willing can't easily get what they need on the day in the safest, quickest possible way, concern breeds concern. So elderly 93-year-old grandpop goes back to his friends, and we wonder why the take-up is so low. Simon, what needs to happen?
Well, the simple fact of the matter is the Medicare card is available and indeed provided to all. And even if you don't have a Medicare card, the simple reality is these are free vaccines. So there is no question in my mind, only way, and I know the federal government's exploring this at the moment, but the only way to fix this is to make vaccines available everywhere. And I mean at your workplace. I mean at your local camp. I mean at the schools. I mean every, we need a different approach. We don't go through hospitals. We don't go through mass vaccination hubs, because what that's likely to do is actually breed, COVID when you've got thousands of people all in the same venue anyway. So you've got risks associated with that. You need to just do it wherever anyone goes. Now you might say, oh, but we don't have enough health workers. Okay, well, I'm not sure what skills you need to stick a needle in someone's arm, but I do understand that does require some degree of medical knowledge. But the point of the matter is there are ways and means that this can be done. And even if it meant that you've got a team of, 500 health workers and you start in Arakoon and you come down the coast to Surfers Paradise and you come into Toowoomba and you go up to Longreach and you go to Mount Isa, guess what? You're going to get them all. And it might take 6 months, but you'll do every single person because you will have this mass capability walking into stores. Hey, would you like a COVID badge? Sure. Stick your arm out. Bang. Have a seat for 50 minutes. Why can't we do that, David? Right. There's nothing to say we can't.
Absolutely. The travelling roadshow and
exactly.
A bit of a commercial aspect to it. The home loan you can get at the Woolworths, the car insurance you can get at Coles. It's time to bring it to where the people are.
Exactly. And to demystify, because this is the other great embarrassment, really, is that about a month ago now, we had this great fear campaign surrounding AstraZeneca. Now, I mean, there have been more AstraZeneca vaccines that have been distributed around the world than you could count. And maybe you can count them, but the simple reality is we're talking about millions, right? And yes, I'm not denying the fact that there have been risks associated with AstraZeneca, and the government wants to get hyper careful, and I'm talking about the federal government here, by saying, well, hang on a minute, Pfizer for people of a certain age and what have you. So they're now saying, oh, look, if you want to get it anyway, just get it. I mean, why bring this fear campaign? Because the Jeanette Youngs of this world, I mean, the next Queensland governor, can you believe it? After her comments this week, you would really have to wonder whether she's in a position to seriously put herself forward, because that fear-mongering, and in fact, on Talkback Radio, David, they're now saying that she's become the darling of the anti-vax set. The Chief Health Officer in Queensland, the darling of that outfit. So, I mean, what does that say? Talk about mixed messages and confusion, because she's worried that 18-year-olds are going to die because they're on AstraZeneca. How many 18-year-olds have died having received AstraZeneca in America or Britain or Germany? Right. Well, I think what's so sad about Jeanette Young is this. I mean, and look, there's several dimensions to this. Anastasia Palaszczuk's announcement of this woman as the governor. Now, the governor is the ultimate, or the Governor-General, the non-political individual in our system of government, right? They are at the very pinnacle, above and beyond the political fray. Yet they make this announcement while she's still the Chief Health Officer, and then what do we have? We have a car crash, and the car crash is a COVID outbreak. And what does this woman do? Rather than remain disciplined and separate from the political dimension, she jumps in the pool, literally. And the consequence is she is now so besmirched. I'd like to know how she's going to work with, hypothetically, a David Crisafulli government when he's Premier. How does that look when she's the governor running the Executive Council and he walks in with the papers to be signed, and this woman, this highly hyper-political woman, is sitting there at Government House on Fernberg Road? How does that look?
Right. Fast forward a decade, COVID is well under control. We've mastered perhaps a second outbreak of some other curious thing. You could look back and say this woman was vital back then. She's now the governor, but it's too soon, far too soon.
Well, what you can be sure of this much. They'll all be coming up to her, and when she's cutting ribbons at shows and at Ascot Racecourse, in a big hat. And the questions she's going to be getting from the journalists are, so, Jeanette, what's, Governor, what's your view on this outbreak or that outbreak or whatever? And is she going to opinionate then? Seriously. I just think it's a very bad look. And look, I don't deny her taking the job of governor. I mean, gosh, anyone offered the job, why wouldn't you take it? But jumping into bed with the political dimension is so awkward. I mean, I've never heard a state governor. I've never heard anybody. In fact, state governors traditionally and governors-general have never been hyper-political, and they certainly haven't been since Sir John Kerr, I might tell you. And even Kerr wasn't political. He made a judgment call of his reading of the Constitution, and, it didn't suit the government of the day, but he wasn't political about it. I mean, Gough Whitlam would argue it was hyper-political because it meant the fall of his government. But, I mean, the consequence was, well, there was then an election, which, of course, if Whitlam had won, it would have proved, in fact, that the Australian people didn't agree with Kerr's view, but they didn't vote for Whitlam, they voted for Fraser. So the reality is, when you choose to go down that path, I'm very disappointed, David, that we've come to a point where this fired-up enthusiasm, almost to the point of it being, well, there's a real concern now that the state premiers, particularly the Labor premiers, have really started to sort of occupy a place of, we can actually craft our own calculated message here to squeeze ScoMo and to squeeze this government in varieties of different ways. And, there's some talk this week about whether we even retain the National Cabinet and whether, in fact, that model deserves sustenance and retention. And of course, ScoMo has to make. I know he wants to be the sort of Churchillian kind of prime minister here, and a little bit like Menzies, with this notion that we were all in this together. But Churchill was able to succeed in doing this. Menzies wasn't. Menzies sought a national government. He even wanted to be part of a national government in Britain, made up of Commonwealth prime ministers, and he didn't get that success any more than he got a kind of a national sort of leadership hub here. It's not a tradition Australians have ever been enthusiastic about. And so ScoMo's probably overreached here to expect that the premiers would be on his side collectively. There's too much in it for the premiers. They've all gained very much. You know, people like McGowan in the West, Palaszczuk in Queensland, you know, and even Andrews. I mean, goodness me, Andrews' government responsible for 800 deaths. Still sort of riding okay, you know, good and solid. You know, you have an election there tomorrow, they'd win it. Now, don't ask me about the psyche of these people, because that government of all deserves so much critique, and yet they're there and, you know, no one seems to bat an eyelid.
45 national cabinet meetings down, possibly abolish it, but this week we have learned that we'll move toward extreme measure lockdowns only. What does that mean? Does that, you know, if 3 or 9 cases puts us in lockdown, what does extreme mean?
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is the problem. You know, you get one case in WA and the whole world falls apart, you know, whereas in Sydney, you know, I mean, yes, I think there were 20 or 30 cases, and I mean, these are big numbers compared to the 1 or 2 cases. An extreme lockdown isn't something that I think we could ever imagine Gladys Berejiklian would ever contemplate, and or at least her interpretation of extreme would be to lock down 5 suburbs, whereas we both know that in Perth you lock down the whole city, and in Brisbane you lock down the whole city. You know, these are things that the Labor government is very comfortable to sort of, you know, suffocate the death out of COVID. And I'm not saying that that's not a bad idea if it's warranted, but this is the problem, Dave. We don't get clarity on the health advice. We never get clarity on that. It's all very opaque. It's sort of very, oh, well, you know, this is what the health authorities are telling us. And you say, well, they tell you one thing in Perth, a very different story, or the interpretation or the way it's represented in Sydney is vastly different. You know what I mean? So I don't think a lot of Australians have confidence in this. They do want to be safe, and they do want to feel protected by their governments, and this is why state governments have been able to, you know, resonate this message that you need to trust us and that we'll get you through this. We just extended the mask wearing in Canberra for another week. Now, there are no cases over here. This is just hypersensitivity by this government. Now, look, I do understand ACT is right in the heart of New South Wales, and it's understandable that there'll be a fear that some maverick out of Sydney with COVID will come in Canberra and start polluting people. I know it's conceivable, and in a way, after 2 weeks now of real problems in Sydney, it is extraordinary that hasn't happened yet. It's not like the borders are locked here in Canberra. You know, you can go sauntering off to Queanbeyan or go up to Yass or wherever you want to go, or indeed Sydney for that matter, at the drop of, you know, you just jump in the car and off you go. So, you know, these are the sorts of interesting twists and turns here. But each jurisdiction, David, they have this wonderful authority to play the cards the way they want and tweak the dials and do what they feel they need to do to win whichever little tiny Pyrrhic victory they're seeking. There, I just want to say something about Crisafulli. I was studying his form this week, the Queensland opposition leader, and I did find it's very difficult for opposition leaders because they don't want to advocate opening everything up when clearly people are concerned about it. And you know, and I was rather fascinated with his style this week because he came out and he said, look, you know, what I want is transparency in decision making, and I think we're all entitled to that. If locking down is the way to go, fine. But you need to be transparent, and this notion, this kind of knee-jerk, Jeanette Young stuff, it's just like, what is this? It's bull in China shop stuff. And I think Crisafulli was sort of leading that with some of his commentary this week, and I thought it was quite effective, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of that from the opposition in Queensland, more of now listen, totally okay if lockdown's the way to go, but we need clarity here. We need evidence of good, sound judgment and sound decision-making. And I don't think most people think that Stephen Miles, for God's sakes, or really Anastasia, are very good at that at the moment. It's just, they're using the old Joe Bielke-Peterson standard. Oh, don't you worry about that. You just listen to me and I'll sort it out. Don't you worry about that. And they're using exactly that formula. Now, Joe had a wonderful way of just getting things done. Now, maybe there is that 5% of Queenslanders who sees Anastasia in that way. And, Peter Beattie learned a lot from Joh Bjelke-Petersen, and I do think there is a genuine perspective that this is that kind of Queensland approach. It's a very compelling thought.
Just wonderful today to have former political lecturer and social commentator Simon Paton on the line. Simon, we are over 2 years into the current federal term of government. ScoMo due to call an election within the next 10 months. What might bring it on? Tell us a bit about what's going on.
Well, I have to explain this, David. I mean, the federal environment is such that the triggers that a Prime Minister can use to reach out to the Governor-General are a bit different than the ones available to some of the premiers. For example, in Queensland and New South Wales and Victoria, for example, you must go to the Governor every 4 years. It is set in the Constitution for the state that there are laws that define when you must hold that election, like the United States. But in the federal environment, that is the Commonwealth Parliament, it's a bit different. It's a 3-year term, not a 4-year term, and there is some degree of flexibility in the last year. So in effect, it's difficult to go to the Governor-General in the first 2 years and justify. There are grounds, but it's unusual to justify asking the Governor-General to call out the writs and actually initiate an election. But in the last year, the triggers are available for the Prime Minister to call an earlier, I say, election as opposed to an early election. So from about November this year, he places himself in an environment where he can call an election comfortably. He could do it now, but the circumstances would be unusual to call it now. It's just a little bit too early. But by November, he's in a zone. So between November and obviously by May next year, he does need to call an election. And the closer he gets to May, his options are far more limited. Now, in Australia, of course, there are many factors that are on the mind of a Prime Minister when they do call an election. Things like school holidays, seasons. People don't like going out, for example. So it's unusual to have a winter election in Australia. It's unusual to have an election unless you're calculated about it. And what I mean by that is this. If you hold an election during school holidays, you're probably doing it deliberately to take advantage of the fact that a number of Australians will not be home and therefore may choose not to vote, and that may have an impact in some electorates. Right. Now, traditionally, the reasons you go to an election in December or November, and there have been a number of very significant elections in those months, it's usually because you've done enough during the year, you've demonstrated sufficiently that you've got a bit of street cred, that the polls are with you, and you just take an opportunity when it's getting close to the best season, when most people are feeling pretty positive about themselves. They're either about to go on holidays. If it's early December, it's before most of the school holidays have started, not for the private schools, but that particular audience isn't considered influential in elections. So the first week of December is a very frequent month, and some of the big victories have taken place then. Other months that are quite popular are March. Very unusual, if ever. I do recall there was an election, oh goodness me, like the 22nd of December, I think the government went to an election and lost, by the way. Very difficult to go that close to Christmas. But generally speaking, there are no elections in January. There's rarely an election in February. There's more likely to be an election in March if there isn't Easter. There's no chance of it being in April. There's too many other things going on with Anzac Day and Easter most of the time in April. And then, of course, May. So realistically, you then think, all right, so how many options does ScoMo have for next year? Well, if you backtrack, May being too late, April being too busy, we're looking at March, David. So March is definitely the last viable time he could call an election, but that's almost the last gasp. He can't really do it after March. Could he do it in February? Yes. Why would he do it in February? Because something had happened that was in his favour. He won't do it in January because everyone's on holidays. December then comes into play, and it's only going to be the first week of December. So there's only one weekend that you could really explore, and that's the first weekend in December. And then going back to November, what have you got? Well, you've got Melbourne Cup, which gets in the way. But that's about all, really, in November. There's nothing really significant that would stop an election taking place in November. So in my mind, the peak months worth considering would be November or March.
November or March. And our listeners would be interested to know that Easter this year is late. Easter next year, 2022, is late April. I'm with you for March, by which time the forecasts show that the vaccination cycle could be almost fully complete for the nation. With the cycle complete, it really could be, to quote Scott Morrison, be managed like an infectious disease as any other in the community. Is it wishful thinking?
No, not at all. You see, the challenge for ScoMo really is this. If he can make getting a vaccine as normal as getting a flu vaccine, and even that's probably overcomplicated. In other words, if he could get into every workplace, just like they do now, all the public sector, for example, all get their flu vax managed within the agency. So if all of the public service was inoculated through that mechanism, if there were free vaxes and a promotional campaign through chemists nationally, he can easily do that. And he should be doing that now. Like, in effect, what ought to happen is they need a campaign and a strategy that sees that from the 1st of August, say, you have this engagement through chemists, you do a massive comms campaign, and you say to people, keep Australia safer, get yourself inoculated. And something really basic, and walk in with your Medicare card, no forms to fill in, no mumbo-jumbo, use your Medicare card and sort it all out through the simplest method so that you don't have these poor aged people walking in with these stupid online forms that don't make sense to them, that they can't even get into, can't see on their phone, they don't know what's going on. It's got to be super, super straightforward. And if if the systems are down at the chemist, they fill in a piece of paper that registers the person's name and the fact that they got that vax on that date. You give them a carbon copy of the damn thing, they take that away, or a little card or something that says, you've had your first vax, come back, because this is the problem with COVID, David, is you've got that second shot, so the discipline required with the 2 shots does mean it is it's a double whammy. There's a double effort involved with this, and that does require a fair bit of planning and, cost and all the rest of it. But if you want to be authentic about it, and you don't want to dilly-dally with all this mumbo-jumbo about whether it's AstraZeneca or Pfizer, this has been a real headache, because I think a lot of suspicious people are saying, well, I'm not going to get anything until they've sorted that out. And you don't blame people for thinking that way. But the point is, how long do people wait? It does come down to the very reality that if Australia is going to move forward, and if one of the criteria that is so burning ScoMo at the moment is this issue of vaccinations, we'll fix it. It's not like it can't be done. You just fix it, you do a very hard promotional campaign, you get some very prominent Australians as part of that campaign, and you just flood the TV screens and the YouTube videos and the Facebook pages and your Instagrams and everywhere you want. Yeah, it might be the most expensive campaign they've ever spent money on, but guess what? They haven't spent anything yet. Nothing much has been spent attracting people to get inoculated.
Right.
So you've got to start spending the money sometime, and I think that money well spent, to be honest.
Yep. Well, we know that ScoMo can fill up the TV screens with his former tourism style. So let's do it again to move the country toward vax. Simon Paton, we go to a listener question now from a beloved fan.
Oh.
Yeah, we're hearing again this week from a highly engaged fan, Genevieve. Genevieve is back.
Oh, good.
Yeah, lovely listener. She says, Mr. Paton, good day. I want to go to Canada. I'm really interested in that French-looking Prime Minister. I want to see him debate. I want to see him doing all the prime things that Prime Ministers do. Mr. Paton, I'm fully vaccinated. Even at stage 3 of the road to normal, I would still need to quarantine just 7 days upon return to Australia. This reduces the available days for me to see my dear Mr. Trudeau. When will I ever get my holiday back?
Yes. Look, Genevieve, firstly, I almost wonder if a trip to Port Douglas and a YouTube video of Premier Trudeau may be a better alternative, because unfortunately, I think if you were to spend any time around Ottawa and you were to witness Premier Trudeau in the flesh, I think you'd be underwhelmed, frankly. Not so much at his presence, because he's quite a handsome fellow, but more by what he stands for or doesn't stand for. So, Genevieve, unfortunately, I think you find that if I could draw a parallel, perhaps, between anybody, I'd probably draw a parallel with Dan Andrews, to be honest. I think Dan Andrews and Premier Trudeau have a very similar ilk, and there's just a little bit too much that you need to do a little digging on, Genevieve, about Premier Trudeau before you race over to Canada. As difficult as that would be right now, I accept that 7-day return traveller headache for you is a problem. And I do think, David, in relation to Genevieve's question, I think this is a problem when you start talking about international travel, because this expectation of the 7-day return has to be factored in somehow so that, that we have a means of, presumably that isn't in hotel quarantine for a fully vaxxed up Genevieve, because my hope would be that she could do that at home. And I think these are the very important metrics that need to come out soon, is that if you are fully vaccinated, we need to be absolutely sure that those people have some sort of confidence that they can go home and do that quarantining there. But I do think that's the counter weight, and it's a negative counterweight, so to speak, for international travel moving forward for a while, and that Genevieve will have to sacrifice a bit of her time, and that is going to be a reality. And unless we can come up with some creative options, like, for example, staying at a resort, I don't know how you do that, though, where, you might get access to the facilities, but you wouldn't be able to be allowed out into the community. It's still very risky, and I think we're just going to have to suck it and see. I'm mindful, Genevieve, that, you want to go to Canada, but, maybe we explore expanding the cruise industry with only Australian cruising. And we think about, all right, so if you've got a fully vaccinated crew and you've got a fully vaccinated passenger list, and those people go away, there's no signs when they come back, they've had 10 days to really test it out. What does that look like for tourists? What do we do with that kind of a model? These are all things that are around the traps, and I think we're probably going to have to explore what they will look like. Everyone in the tourism industry is struggling at the moment, especially those reliant on international tourism. So I do think these are very good questions for the future. Genevieve, it's not as straightforward as we hope, and I'm sorry that I've perhaps burst your bubble with respect to Premier Trudeau, but I would encourage you to perhaps do a little bit more analysis of his performance, and I think you'll find that maybe you may get a nasty shock.
Simon Paton, we must go. It has been such a pleasure to catch up. Briefly, love to hear about the next step in your own vaccination treatment. What will be happening next for you?
Well, probably more likely that I will arrange a vaccination in Canberra through other means, not through the Canberra system. I have some contacts in other areas that I'll probably be able to acquire the second vaccine, and that will be vastly more streamlined than what many of the citizens are going to experience. Needless to say, Canberra does have a very good system if you're a Canberran. If you're a Territorian here, you do get looked after with respect to this. The problem is, of course, it's itinerants. It's people who, don't live somewhere. We need a cleaner system. The Medicare card, David, is the only way to go. Walk in with your Medicare card, get the jab.
Absolutely. Simon Paton, former political lecturer, social commentator, a gift to spend some time with you. Thank you for your company. Already looking forward to the next edition of Australia Under the Microscope with you. Thanks for your time on Questions Without Notice.
Thank you so much. And yes, they are certainly without notice, but they're always very enjoyable, David. It's an absolute privilege. Our wonderful audience hopefully have enjoyed it as well. And just back to Genevieve, once again, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to give Genevieve a happy reflection there. And we might hear back from her next time about her analysis of Premier Trudeau in more detail and see what she has to say. But in the meantime, David, thank you for your time. Thanks for having me. Look forward to the next time.
Simon Paton, thank you. Goodbye. You've been listening to Australia Under the Microscope. That was Questions Without Notice. Thanks to Simon Paton, former university lecturer, social commentator. A very special edition of the show, the vaccine edition. We do want to acknowledge the human toll and the cost of COVID-19. We send care and safety your way. What does the vaccine, its rollout, and the road to normal mean for you? Let us know in the comments. It always makes for an interesting discussion. We look forward to welcoming you next time to Questions Without Notice on Australia Under the Microscope. If you are like Genevieve and you have a question, let us know what it is. We'd love to find out the answers for you. Thanks for your company. Enjoy your day.